Welcome to the Ecological Home, where we explore ways to create healthy, energy-efficient, and joyful places to live. I'm your host, Terry Cline, a Pacific Northwest native and an architect with over 20 years designing resilient, passive solar homes using local and natural materials. Thanks for listening today. Our goal on the Ecological Home is to give you tools. Used thoughtfully, these tools can help you create nurturing shelter and community support systems for a resilient future of comfortable, sustainable, and healthy places to live. In this episode, we're going to talk about design as a health resource with architect Terry Cline. Terry's been involved in green design since the mid-'70s and now practices space therapy for homes and businesses on top of his work as an architectural designer. Terry, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks, Terry. It's great to be with you again.
I interviewed you a couple years ago, and one of the things we talked about is dissolving the elite aspect of architecture. Now, you actually do this by showing people how to use what they already have to create spaces. You say feed the soul, and you call this practice space therapy. Tell us about that.
One way architecture, the profession of architecture is kind of elite. Most people can't afford architects. Only 2% of homes are designed by architects.
Right.
And given what's going on worldwide, globally, there's a lot of architects that are focusing on how to dissolve that elite aspect. And one of the things that I've been focused on over the years is the connection between space and behavior, hence the name space therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea being that if I can't create a space that supports desired behavior using only what exists, then I'll never be able to do it in renovations, additions, or new construction.
Aha.
Because if that component is missing, then it's not really quality architecture, and it certainly does not feed the soul.
Right.
And therefore, that piece of good architecture, the space-behavior connection, can be affordable to everybody, either free to those who are in jail cells or in hospices, and everyone else in between.
You're talking about arranging space differently, and that sounds a little bit like feng shui or vastu. Where does the space therapy differ from that? Well,
the space therapy behavioral health approach to design is different. It's a fully integrated, holistic approach to what I refer to as lifestyle space integration.
Mm-hmm.
And it's using principles from neuroscience, brain research, environmental psychology, social, architectural, interior, consumer design, and advanced common sense. All these theories that inform space evaluations and design decisions. And even occasionally some principles from feng shui and vastu shastra.
Okay. So you incorporate those with all these other research data.
Yeah, right. And they're coming, neuroscience is coming out with a lot of empirical evidence that the spaces that we live and work in, regardless of the style or the cost of the space and furnishings, is having a profound impact on our behavior patterns.
Mm-hmm. Now,
so is that whether we're working with cardboard boxes or high-end designer furnishings?
Right.
We can create spaces that truly support the soul.
We're talking about the healthy aspects of how a space affects someone, and most people probably don't realize that an architect's first responsibility is to protect the health and safety of the occupants of a building. And, there are all these materials we've been bringing into our homes that have been damaging our health, mainly from a physical standpoint. And that's what most people have been hearing about, is the materials in furnishings and paints and glues and all sorts of building materials that are making people sick. We really want to change that, but what we're talking about here isn't just our bodies. We're talking about our spirit and the social health. In fact, you say there are 5 different areas of human experience that buildings should be a health resource for.
Right. The physical, which you just spoke about, Terry, the shelter, safety, control of toxic materials, etc., handicap accessibility and so forth.
Right.
Then there's the psychological experience and the environment that supports personal activity satisfaction. And the social, which, supporting desired social interaction.
Like communication and
communications, family dynamics, business dynamics, and the psychological and social, overlap quite a bit. And then there's the spiritual aspect, which is all about how does one actually connect in a spiritual way to one's personal environment, whether it's residential or business. It has something to do with supporting inspiration and feelings of well-being and aesthetics and beauty.
Uh-huh.
And then the last one, which really is the result of the first four having been achieved or not, is the global experience and environment. We're striving for low carbon footprints and sustainability and resiliency.
Right, and the global, the climate change issues that are showing up and the things that people are seeing on the news about the health of our Earth. A lot of those spin back down to the smaller choices that we make.
Right. It's an inside job.
Yeah.
It starts within oneself, and it requires a connection with one's own soul, and then a projection outward into the spaces that we live and work in, that our children are being taught in, etc. In other words, architecture can be seen as a health setting, right? And a missing health opportunities in design often develops environmental stress.
Right. So tell me a little bit about how you would go about taking existing elements and furnishings and changing the psychological health of a space.
Yeah. Basically, there's this mind-body connection, and the missing element that often isn't looked at is the context. The habitable space where this mind-body connection plays out. And so, looking at it from a psychological standpoint, and as I said before, it somewhat overlaps with the social piece. But for instance, if there's a room that's too crowded and not enough room to move around, or there's a lot of hard surfaces, reverberation time is increased, which creates feelings of a lack of intimacy. Or if there's a space that is without character, white painted sheetrocked walls and no carpet on the floor, there's no character. There's nothing we can relate to, and we are cellular human beings. And the more cellular nature of the materials and being able to create what I refer to as cocooning spaces within spaces like the Russian dolls.
Explain a little bit about, if we can back up for just a second, the cellular human beings and cellular materials. That's not a term that's familiar to me.
Yeah, well, we're made of particles that make cells, that make organs, that make bodies. And if we can take that analogy and project it forth. So I'm sitting in a chair right now, as maybe you are too, Terry, and the chair that I'm sitting in is my next cell. And the chair I'm sitting in is sitting in another cell of space within the room that I'm in. And oftentimes that second or third or fourth layer of implied space is absent. That it goes from, the chair without arms to the main container, defined by floor, walls, and ceiling. And there's often an opportunity to create a multi-layered cocooning layer of spaces, implied spaces, that when it's there, it just feels right. It doesn't matter what it looks like, it just feels right.
Wow.
And adjusting such things as using such things as tropisms. Like, we're phototropic. We tend to move towards the light like a plant will do. But there's all other types of tropisms as well. Spatiotropism, we tend to move towards well-defined spaces. And so those are some examples of the things that we manipulate when we're doing a consultation or design.
Okay, because I can see how everything is really intertwined, but you have to be able to address them separately to be able to understand how each aspect is going to affect people.
Yeah, and there all these different 5 aspects are definitely they can be approached in a linear way, but they really do overlap. And it's more of a holistic approach.
Now, you'd say that psychological health and social health are really probably the 2 closest that intertwine the most?
I would say so, but also I think the spiritual piece comes in there as well, because as soon as we are addressing the psychological and the social piece, which is how does one feel in one's environment? And how one feels in one's environment has a lot to do with the level of relatability one feels to the materials and all the lighting, the pools of light. Is the lighting in the right location? And the acoustical quality, is it a hard space? We ought to know what space we're in. If we were blindfolded and walked into a home, we ought to know that we're in the bathroom and not the bedroom. and sometimes that's not clear.
That could cause problems.
Well, it does. And if you've got a bedroom space that is white sheetrocked walls with no carpet on the floor, and nothing to absorb the acoustics, and no cellular structure visible, it's not a very relatable space, and it's not that intimate.
No.
So that impacts the psychological feeling and social.
And what you described there sounds like a very cold, institutional, like a room in a mental hospital is what that called up to me. And I would think that kind of setting could use this type of design consideration even more than the typical home where people have brought their personal things and personal lives into the space.
Well, exactly. That's a great example, actually, because I gave a talk years ago up in Maine, up in Augusta, the Mental Health Institute, and a lot of psychiatrists, psychologists in the audience. The space was, I ended the talk by referencing the fact that if the goal was to maintain, behavior patterns as is, they didn't need to change a thing. I mean, it was the worst space I could. It was filled with what we have coined as SDD, to go along with ADHD and NDD, nature deficit disorder. Well, we've got SDD, which is space deficit disorder.
Uh-huh. Great.
And it runs rampant. It runs rampant. It doesn't matter what kind of facility it is, whether it's residential, business, hospital, classrooms. It doesn't matter what the style of the design. It's really about, we are such a materialistic world, and we focus so much on objects that it's difficult to focus on space.
Yeah.
And anybody that's trying to design space, whether they're professional or just layperson, the more we can focus on space, the better the end result will be, because it's the space that we relate to, not necessarily whether it's a high-end piece of furniture or a cardboard box.
Right. Now, unfortunately, we are about out of time, and this is really fascinating. I want to cover more of this. Can you stay around a while longer so we can do another segment?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to.
Okay, great. Now, before we go to break, tell our listeners where they can go to find out more.
Website, DwellRight.com. That's DwellRight. And email would be info@DwellRight.com.
Okay, great. Now, this is The Ecological Home, and I'm your host, Terry Phelan. We're talking today with Terry Cline of DwellRight, who's located in Massachusetts. This is segment 1 of 2, so please listen to segment 2 for the rest of the conversation. Whether building a house, installing a rain garden, painting a bedroom, or retrofitting your home for health and resource efficiency, you'll hear some great information you can use on each episode of The Ecological Home. Thanks for listening. Welcome to The Ecological Home, where we explore ways to create healthy, energy-efficient, and joyful places to live. I'm your host, Terry Phelan, a Pacific Northwest architect with over 20 years designing sustainable homes and communities. This episode is the second of two segments on design as a health resource with architect Terry Cline. Terry practices space therapy for homes and businesses and has some really interesting insight into making homes, businesses, and other places we spend our time healthy in 5 different aspects of the human experience. Terry, welcome back.
Good to be back again.
So in our last segment, we were talking about the 5 areas of human experience that buildings can be a health resource for. Can you tell us again what those are?
Sure. It was the physical, which has to do with shelter and safety and protection, control of toxic materials, codes, handicap accessibility, which is pretty basic in most homes.
Right. Those are things that most people will be familiar with.
Right. And then the ones that maybe aren't as familiar would be the second one, which is the entire psychological experience and the psychological environment required, to support personal activity. And then the social, which is very much overlapping with the psychology part, having to do with interactions between people.
Mm-hmm. And
then the spiritual piece, supporting inspiration, feelings of well-being, aesthetics, and beauty. And then last, global.
Okay.
And our desire to create low-carbon footprint and sustainability, resiliency, so forth.
Right. As we said, we do hear a lot about physical health. That's what most people are tuned into. And while it's really important, I'd like to focus on the areas that don't get that much attention. And in our interview here, in our last segment, we explored psychological health and got into social health a little bit. It seems this is one area that we all experience in the space behavior connection, but we may not think about it that much.
Right. It's not something that's so obvious.
Right. It just kind of comes along. And it's in our space.
It's in our spaces. It comes along with the package. And whether we're designers, we're all designers, actually, whether we're fit for public consumption, stamped architects and designers or what, we're all designers. We make design decisions every day.
Right.
Just as simple as deciding what we're going to wear.
Well, it's funny. I think most people, lay people, think of design as a product rather than as a process, and so they don't really realize that they're designing.
Right. Well, and parallel to that, not only is it a process rather than end product, but it's also ultimately the most important piece is that it's an experience. It's a personal experience for self and family and business colleagues. It's like space is a stage set for the theater of life.
Ah,
and
nice.
And we architects, we designers, are creating stage sets. And no different than a movie maker looking at the quality of the lighting, the acoustics, the relationship of every piece of object in that space sets the tone for supporting the intended behavior patterns that are being caught on film. And within an hour and a half or 2 hours, we can be moved radically in many different emotional directions. And the same thing is happening in the spaces that we live and work in, but because we are so object-oriented and focused on what it looks like, we fail to recognize that there's other levels of fine-tunement that have to do with what it feels like. And when you're manipulating seating patterns and you're working with tropisms like phototropism and spatiotropism and scaleotropism, centrotropism.
These are all new words.
These are new. Well, these are words we've coined. I mean, everybody knows what phototropism is, and these are words that we've coined because it represents what we do when we're doing space therapy, if you will, whether we're consulting or designing. It's how to use existing furnishings, using all these tropisms that create an experience, an environment that supports desired behavior patterns.
Well, now, and I don't know if everyone knows what phototropism is. It is where we're drawn towards the light. Is that correct? I think that's what
correct.
You said in our last segment. But I didn't know what it was before. I didn't know what that term was. So I think it's good to explain that.
Yeah. Well, and then therefore there are those that might not know what spatiotropism is either.
Right.
Because I certainly didn't. It was never a word. We coined it. And so spatiotropism, as an example, is that if we step into a space and we're looking for the next place to be in, we tend to gravitate towards a well-defined space. Maybe it's a sitting space within the living room, with maybe a dining space at the other end of the living room. And oftentimes, these subspaces aren't well-defined. And so there's an opportunity to better define these spaces. And when that happens, it just feels right.
Kind of like when you go into a restaurant, people are drawn to the booths rather than the tables because they're well-defined little pods.
Exactly. And to take that analogy back into someone's dining room, here's a really, take-home and try example, which is a dining room table, circular or octagon, is better for communion than a rectangular table that has the head of the table.
Right.
We know through behavioral psychology that sitting next to someone is a good opportunity for working together. Sitting across from someone is a possibility of confrontation, but sitting adjacent to someone creates maximum communication. If that table has a rug under it, it defines a subspace. And with a lamp over the table that's about 30 inches off of the tabletop, it creates an implied overhead plane. And just doing those simple things creates a really strong implied subspace within, let's say, the living room.
Right. Nice.
Yeah. And there's other tropisms, but that's maybe for another program.
Okay. Now, what about the spiritual environment? I mean, I understand the social and the psychological a little bit better than the spiritual. What elements of the built environment translate in a way that relates to all of us in a spiritual manner?
Yeah, well put, too, because it's not as easily definable how to create a space that spiritually connects. But to me, it has something to do with feeling inspiration, a sense of well-being, surrounded by beauty and aesthetics. And, so one example might be the fact that aesthetics is partly a harmony of opposites, having to do with contrast. So, as example, to create a space that has dark areas and light areas, has solid areas and void areas, has hard surfaces and soft surfaces, rough surfaces and smooth surfaces. And the more that we can create these complementary aspects of a space, the more it feels right, because we can relate to that, because that's the nature of who we are. It's the nature of reality. One good example would be a bowl of rice, okay? In a bowl of rice, and you've got two bowls to choose from to put the rice in. White rice. One is white bowl, one is black bowl. Which bowl would we put the rice in?
I would put it in the black bowl, because then you'd be able to see the grains of rice, and it would set it off.
Exactly. It's a deliberate attempt to create contrast in all these various areas. And that feeds the soul, because it makes the space relatable. We can relate to it. Another concept is one of proportion, and the Fibonacci or the golden rectangle. One side is, let's say, equal to 1 inch, and the other longer side is equal to 1.618, which is a ratio that we find everywhere in nature. So the first digit on our finger can be 1, and the second digit on our finger measures about 1.618. And if that digit is now 1, then the next digit is 1.618. And this is a proportion that we find everywhere in nature. And if we can create that in our built environment, then we are connected. So I guess what I'm saying, using the psychological, social, spiritual components, which is often overlooked in architecture, even what's considered to be good and award-winning design, we are creating transition zones from our own inner ecology to the outer ecology, i.e. the planet Earth. Right?
Very nice.
By paying more attention to these subtle but extremely important aspects of what makes for a really healthy and supportive environment that feeds the soul, and if it feeds the soul and acts as a transitional connection to the outer world, then we're on the right path. That's the inside job.
Wow. Well, it's really powerful. I mean, we haven't really touched on global health, which is one of the 5, along with physical health, which is on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And they're both getting so much in the press. Why do you think we as humans are much more apt to focus on these two physical aspects and not pay so much attention to the more esoteric side of design?
Yeah, well, it's easier to focus on the materialistic world rather than what you referred to as the esoteric. But because my opinion is anyway that because we live in this warrior society, primarily male-dominated, primarily object-focused, oriented, materialistic world, because we spend so much focus on that results in what Jerry Mander referred to, the absence of the sacred. Mm-hmm. And because the sacred's not here, and we don't pay enough credence to it, we have what you just referred to, which is the other end of this pendulum, which is global warming.
Right.
So what makes us human is our capacity to adapt. But as the Chinese proverb goes, if we're not looking where we're headed, we'll likely wind up there. And so the important question that might be worthy asking is where is our current resiliency and abilities to adapt taking us?
Are we the frog in the pot of water that's starting to boil on the stove? Is that where our adaptability is taking us? And
Exactly. Yeah, and you referred to the way to boil a frog is to put it in a pot of cold water and turn it up slowly.
Right.
And that's what's happening to us. We're not aware of what's unfolding. So I, as an architect, and you, Terry, and others, anybody that's got any design sensitivity is looking at what are the missing components, what are the mold that we live and work in that's reinforcing behavior patterns, and are these patterns that are being reinforced the patterns that we want to be reinforced? And there's this space-behavior connection because of this thing called spatial dependent memory. And every time we step into a space, a memory is activated, and we tend to follow the dictates of the memory. So we tend to, play out over and over and over again the same behavior patterns. So my thesis is change the space, change the life, change your life.
Wonderful. That's where I want to end this conversation with that thought. Change your space, change your life. Any other words of wisdom you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Well, yes, I have a question and a thought. So basically, through these principles, we become the spaces we inhabit. And so the question would be, what space will you, your children, your clients become? What will we become? And then from Thomas More, an author in a book called Care of the Soul, he said, if we treat everything as if it has soul, we can't go wrong.
Very nice. Well, Terry, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
We've been talking today with Terry Cline of DwellRight, located back east in Massachusetts. This was the second of 2 segments, and we hope you'll listen to the first if you haven't already. DwellRight provides consulting, coaching, and residential design both locally and at a distance. Please visit their website at www.dwellright.com. The Ecological Home is a project of Living Shelter Design made possible by a grant from the Human Links Foundation. Our studio is in Issaquah, Washington, and our audio engineer is Ray Albrecht. Whether building a house, installing a rain garden, painting a bedroom, or retrofitting your home for health and resource efficiency, you'll hear some great information you can use on each episode of The Ecological Home. Let us know what you'd like to hear about at eco-logicalhome.com/contact. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you and can never say that enough. Be on the lookout for more episodes with tools and ideas you can use. From The Ecological Home, my name is Terry Phelan. Take care, and we'll talk again soon.